The cake, the purse, and the first line my 65th birthday. My daughter-in-law knocked my cake onto the patio and smiled. Oops. So, I picked up her $2,500 Gucci purse, dropped it into the fire pit, and said the same word back. That night, I learned one thing. Family love should never cost you your dignity. The cake incident did not come out of nowhere. By the time everyone froze around that ruined mess of frosting and cake on the stone, I already understood exactly what Sloan had done. Oops, my son lost his mind. I simply told him his wife had started it. My name is Lorraine Caldwell. I'm 65, a widow, and this is the story of how I stopped being a guest in my own home that Sunday. I hosted a simple backyard barbecue for my birthday. Just family, a few neighbors, and a lemon cake Brenda had baked from scratch. Sloan arrived late, flaunting her Gucci bag and making sure everyone knew what it cost. She spent the afternoon glued to her phone, visibly irritated that the day was not about her. When it was time to sing happy birthday, Sloan suddenly decided she needed to use the restroom. There was plenty of room to walk around us, but she deliberately squeezed right past the dessert table. I saw her elbow jerk outward. The cake hit the patio and splattered everywhere. She didn't even pause to look down. She just dropped that dry, unapologetic oops and kept walking. Dead silence fell over the yard. Nobody knew what to do. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked over to the lawn chair where Sloan had left her prized possession, picked it up, and dropped it into the glowing embers of the fire pit. Almost instantly, the leather began to smoke, giving off a rancid chemical smell. Harrison sprinted toward me, red-faced and furious, screaming that I was crazy and that I was going to pay for it. I looked him dead in the eye, as calm as if I were watering my hydrangeas. You can send me the bill, Harrison. But first, ask your wife why she decided to destroy my birthday. If Sloan wanted to call the police over a handbag, I was ready to report the intentional destruction of my property and the pattern of harassment happening inside my own home. Sloan walked out of the bathroom just in time to watch the leather curl, blacken and collapse into the flames. Her shriek echoed through the neighborhood. But as they were about to find out, this was only the beginning. Harrison and Sloan had moved in with me about a year earlier, claiming they were saving for a down payment. At first they stayed mostly in their room. But slowly Sloan took over my house, my shelves, my bathroom, my routines, until I felt like a guest in the home my husband had left me the morning after the fire pit incident. The tension in the house was suffocating. Harrison stomped into the kitchen, scowling, demanding an apology and a check for $2,500. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat down at the island, and took a slow sip before answering. There will be no check, and there will be no apology. Her emotional baggage is not my responsibility, I said, keeping my voice completely level. He scoffed, whining that Sloan was upstairs crying her eyes out and that I was being vicious. Rather than get dragged into a circular argument with a 35-year-old man acting like a toddler, I finished my coffee, rinsed my mug, and went upstairs. I walked into my primary ensuite bathroom, the one Sloan had cluttered with her imported moisturizers, perfumes, and heat-styling tools. Shoving my own toiletries into a tiny corner, I found a heavy-duty cardboard box. Moving methodically, I packed up every single bottle, brush, and jar that belonged to her. I carried the box out to the hallway and dropped it right in front of their bedroom door. Then I called a locksmith I trusted. By that afternoon, my primary bedroom and bathroom had brand new deadbolts. When Sloan tried to waltz in to use my soaking tub that evening, she was met with a locked door and her belongings sitting in the hall. I could hear her complaining bitterly to Harrison, but I just turned up my radio and went about my evening. On Tuesday morning, Sloan came downstairs expecting breakfast. For the past year, I had cooked and bought groceries for all three of us with my retirement money. She dropped onto a bar stool and asked, "Harrison has a huge meeting today. How long on the eggs?" "I have no idea." "Sloan," I said, sitting down with my toast, "I guess it depends on what time you start cooking them." She opened the main refrigerator and found almost nothing. Earlier that week, I had moved my own food into a mini fridge in my bedroom. "Where is all the food?" she demanded, her voice going up an octave. "Harrison is starving." "Harrison knows how to navigate a grocery store," I replied smoothly, brushing a crumb off my plate. "I'm a widow, Sloan, not a maid. Starting today, you two are responsible for your own meals." She opened her mouth to argue, but the look on my face stopped her cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done explaining. That afternoon, my daughter Meredith called. She lives a few states over and has a lifelong habit of siding with whoever offers her the most convenience. Harrison had obviously called her to complain. "Mom, you're being totally unreasonable. Just cut her a check for the purse and make them dinner." You know how easily Harrison gets stressed? Meredith said using her signature condescending tone. Anyway, my husband needs a short-term loan to float his business, and I figured since you clearly have money to burn, there are no loans. Meredith, the Bank of Mom is permanently closed, I said firmly, hanging up before she could start her guilt trip. It was time to shut off all the faucets. Years ago, right after my husband died, I opened a convenience checking account with Harrison, listed only for emergency access. It was strictly a safety net for medical expenses in case something happened to me, and every dollar in it came from my retirement income. Recently, though, I'd noticed the balance steadily bleeding out. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and asked the teller to print the statements for the last 6 months. Sitting across from the personal banker, I read through the line items: upscale steakhouse, designer clothing boutiques, day spas. My son's medical emergencies had Sloane's name written all over them. By the time I finished reading, nearly $18,000 had vanished in 6 months. After the banker confirmed that every deposit had come from my retirement account, I withdrew the remaining funds, transferred them to my private account, closed the convenience account, and canceled the card linked to it. It took 20 minutes to take control of my finances back. At 2 p.m. the next day, my cell phone rang. It was Harrison. He was whispering frantically into the receiver, sounding equal parts furious and humiliated. "Mom, I'm at a restaurant with Sloane and a few of her clients. My card just declined. The bank said the account is closed. You are humiliating me." "The bank isn't lying to you, Harrison," I said, casually pruning my rose bushes with my garden shears. "That money was for my hospital bills, not your wife's luxury lifestyle. You'll have to pay with your own money. My credit cards are totally maxed out right now," he hissed. "Then I highly suggest you ask the manager for an apron and start washing dishes." "Have a lovely lunch," I said, and ended the call. I powered my phone off, poured myself a glass of iced water and sat on the patio to enjoy the sunshine. For once, Harrison had to deal with the problem himself. Part 2. The dinner party, the car, and the final exit. Sloane hated losing control. To her, my newly established boundaries weren't rules. They were a challenge to her authority. On Friday night, without giving me a heads up, she hosted a dinner party with 3 of her girlfriends and their husbands, as if my house belonged to her. I came downstairs at 8 p.m., in my bathrobe and slippers, and found Sloane hosting a dinner party in my living room, using my crystal and opening my late husband's vintage Cabernet. I walked to the sound system, turned it off, then collected the wine and unused glasses from the coffee table. "Good evening," I said with a perfectly polite ice-cold smile. "Lorraine, we are in the middle of a party," Sloane snapped, her neck turning blotchy red as she tried to save face in front of her friends. "I'm so glad you're all having fun," I replied pleasantly, tucking the bottles under my arm. "But this is my wine. This is my house, and it's time for my evening reading. You're welcome to continue your chat on the back patio or up in your bedroom." I flipped on the reading lamp next to the sofa, sat down, and opened my book. Sloane's friends exchanged incredibly awkward glances, muttered some hasty excuses, and within 5 minutes they had grabbed their coats and fled. Sloane stood in the center of the living room, physically shaking with rage. She shot me a look of pure venom, but couldn't think of a single thing to say. She spun on her heels and stomped up the stairs. I casually turned the page of my book, savoring the absolute peace and quiet. The second car was mine, title, insurance, registration, everything. But Harrison had treated it as his personal vehicle for months. He used it to commute and chauffeur Sloane around town, saving himself a fortune in gas, insurance, and maintenance. It was always parked right in the driveway, waiting for him. Sunday night while they slept, I took the spare key, moved the sedan to Brenda's garage 3 blocks away, and walked home with the keys in my pocket. At 7:30 a.m. on Monday, I heard Harrison frantically rushing down the stairs. The front door ripped open and slammed shut. Seconds later, his heavy footsteps pounded into the kitchen where I was steeping a cup of chamomile tea. "Mom, where is the car?" "It's not in the driveway, and Sloane is going to be late for work," he panicked. I blew on my tea before taking a sip. "I put it in storage, Harrison. It's no longer available for your daily commute. But we need it." "How are we supposed to get to work?" he demanded, throwing his hands in the air. "The city bus stops 3 blocks from here. Uber also exists," I answered evenly. "I'm no longer paying the insurance and gas for your free rides. You're a grown man with a salary, figure it out." Harrison went speechless, then sprinted upstairs. A moment later I heard Sloane shrieking. That morning they both left the house in a dead sprint, dragging their feet and looking absolutely miserable. For the first time in years they had to pay their own way. My daughter Meredith couldn't stand being left out of family drama. capitalizing on her husband being out of town for work. She showed up on my front porch unannounced on Wednesday afternoon. When I opened the door, she was standing there with her luggage, fully expecting me to host her, feed her, and above all, tell her she was right. We sat in the backyard right near the fire pit, which was now clean and cold. Meredith didn't waste any time. "Mom, you need to stop this," she commanded, crossing her arms like a disappointed teacher. Harrison called me crying. "He says you're starving them. You stole their car and you totally humiliated Sloan. You are tearing this family apart over a stupid piece of cake." "I am not tearing anything apart, Meredith. I am reclaiming my home," I replied, totally unfazed. "You and your brother seem to think it's my job to subsidize your lives forever. Not anymore." Meredith let out a dramatic sigh. "Look, things are really tight right now. We are going through a rough patch too. I need you to advance me part of my inheritance. It's just $50,000. With that, I can bail out my husband's business, and maybe I can give Harrison a little cash to help him move." I stared at her. There it was. The real reason for her surprise visit, pure greed masquerading as family mediation. "There is no early inheritance, Meredith. The money your father and I saved is to secure my retirement, not to bankroll your husband's failing business or your sister-in-law's Gucci bags." I stood up from my chair. "If you are here as my daughter to visit, you are welcome to sleep in the guest room. If you are here as a debt collector, I suggest you Google nearby hotels." Meredith stayed the night, whispering with Harrison as if the two of them could still pressure me into surrendering. They were wrong. The guest bedroom was the second largest room in the house. Over the past year, Sloan had slowly and aggressively transformed it into her own personal walk-in closet. Rolling clothing racks, dozens of shoeboxes, and full-length mirrors choked the entire space. She had turned my home into her own private boutique. That weekend, while Harrison, Sloan, and Meredith were out, I emptied the guest room. Every dress, shoebox, mirror, and clothing rack went straight into Harrison and Sloan's bedroom. Then I cleaned the space, brought in my easel, canvases, and watercolors, and locked the door to my new art studio. When they got home, I heard Sloan's scream vibrate through the floorboards as she opened her bedroom door and found Mount trash bag. Harrison came flying down the stairs, practically foaming at the mouth. "You can't do this. You bagged up all her expensive clothes like they were garbage," he yelled. I was peacefully misting my orchids in the living room. I looked at him without raising my voice a single decibel. "That is the guest room, Harrison, not Sloan's closet. Her belongings belong in her bedroom. My house is mine again. If things are feeling a little cramped up there, you know exactly where the front door is." The pressure of living under my rules finally cracked my son's marriage wide open. Without my money, my car, and extra space in my house, their marriage started showing exactly what it had been built on. The polite fake smiles disappeared. From my new art studio, I heard the arguments getting louder every day. On a Tuesday night, the powder keg finally blew. "I am leaving this hellhole," Sloan shrieked. I heard the unmistakable sound of suitcase wheels dragging down the hallway. She stomped down the stairs. I was standing in the kitchen casually making a cup of Earl Grey. She glared at me with absolute unfiltered resentment, fully expecting me to say something, to apologize, or maybe beg her to stay for the sake of my son's marriage. I just gently stirred my tea with a little silver spoon and held her gaze with total crushing indifference. She clamped her jaw shut, ripped the front door open, and marched out to the Uber waiting in the driveway. She never looked back. Once the free house, free car, free meals, and free money disappeared, so did her love for my son. Meredith packed up and left the very next morning, realizing there was no money to grift and no alliances left to forge. Harrison was left entirely alone, surrounded by cardboard boxes in a trashed bedroom, facing the consequences of his own life choices for the first time as an adult. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I felt calm for the first time in a long while. There was just one final piece of business left to handle. 2 weeks went by. Harrison tried to worm his way back into my good graces by playing the victim. He started doing the dishes without being asked, greeting me with a soft, pathetic voice, and trying to strike up nostalgic conversations about his childhood. He was desperately waiting for me to say, "Oh, my poor baby, you can stay here forever. Mommy will take care of you." One afternoon he found me sitting in the backyard, enjoying the breeze near the fire pit. "Mom, I know I messed up," he said, sitting down next to me and staring at his shoes. "Sloan totally blinded me. I was an idiot. I am so sorry." "I accept your apology, Harrison," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the tree line. He let out a massive sigh of relief, clearly thinking the storm had passed and we were going right back to the old status quo. "Thanks, Mom. I promise things are going to be so much better around here now." I held up a single hand to stop him. No, Harrison. I am glad you realize where you went wrong, but that doesn't change the reality of the situation. You have exactly 2 months to save your money, find an apartment, and move out of my house. He stared at me, totally blindsided. You're kicking me out. But Sloan is gone. The problem was never just Sloan, I interrupted, keeping my voice gentle but made of iron. The problem was that you viewed me as your permanent safety net. You are 35 years old. It is time for you to build your own life in your own space. I love you, son, but I am done raising you. There was no screaming, there were no arguments. Harrison looked into my eyes and saw that my decision was absolute. 2 months later, he packed the last of his boxes into a U-Haul and handed me his keys. That night, I lit the fire pit in the backyard. I cut myself a thick slice of leftover cake, sank into my favorite patio chair, and watched the flames dance in the dark. The house was quiet, a deep, clean, absolute silence. I took a sip of my tea, smiled into the night, and took a long, deep breath. My home was finally mine again. Sometimes family love is confused with silent suffering. But disrespect in your own home is not peace, it is self-abandonment. I learned that boundaries do not destroy a family, they reveal who truly respects you.